First of all, I guess we don't have any late items, but I'd like to, first of all, start by introducing our new member, Hector Acala from the Checkwith Poirot Architects. He's our AIBC appointee on the panel. So welcome, Hector. Great to have you on board.
Hi,
And
everyone.
sorry?
Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Okay, great. So everybody's seen the agenda. Are there any issues with the agenda? If not, can I have a motion to accept the agenda as presented? Great. Kevin, seconder. Angela, all in favor? Okay, good. And the minutes, we have some minutes from our last meeting, which was a long time ago on July 13th. And is there any issues with that? Anybody had a chance to look at them? No? Okay, can I have a motion to accept the minutes as presented? Angela, seconder Kevin, I'll switch them around. All in favor? Aye. Okay, great. Okay. Well, we have a kind of unusual meeting this evening, as you can see from the agenda. The city staff, planning and development staff, has been tasked by City Council to research and propose options for increasing affordable, adaptable, and family-friendly housing here in Nanaimo. And tonight, the staff will be presenting their proposals to the panel so we can offer our comments and suggestions. And at the end, I believe we need to vote and make some recommendations on them. They would like our support when they take this to council. But before staff begin their presentations, I thought it might be helpful to just remind ourselves of the Design Advisory Panel mandate, which is to consider and assess form and character proposed development projects as a way to ensure they meet the neighborhood context and community design guidelines. Each of these proposals this evening have an impact on those guidelines, and as a result may impact the form and character of future developments. So if you can kind of keep that in mind, our goal this evening then is to share our comments and suggestions with staff, and then to vote on whether we recommend these proposals and also offer any recommendations in terms of the proposals before we're done. And since we've got three proposals and they're quite different, I think what we would do is have each one presented, and then right after a presentation, we'll do our usual roundtable discussion and offer any recommendations. And I think we'll vote on them. I was thinking at first that we maybe vote at the end, but in case we run out of time this evening, we'll sort of get each one out of the way as we go along. Okay. So that said, we'll start with the first presentation, which is on infill housing and secondary suite regulations, which Caleb Horn will present to us. So take her away, Caleb.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So I'll just share my screen here, and I think we'll just go through these. I kind of am starting with a two-parter here. Where is it? Sorry. So I think you can see that now. Great. So I'm talking about basically two items. It's infill housing and secondary suite regulation. So I might stop halfway through this PowerPoint, and we could maybe discuss the secondary suite and the infill housing separately at the board's discretion. And yeah, maybe just a little bit of extra context. We did receive direction from council to explore these items, and we're kind of, everything here is put under the theme of increasing housing options. So everything I'll be talking about this evening, as well as Lisa Brinkman, are kind of tied back to just looking at opportunities for increasing housing options. So to start things off, we will be looking at secondary suites. So I might go in a bit more detail here than I have with some of the other groups, just because a lot of people on this panel are, of course, experts in the field of building and also design. So we're definitely interested to hear your comments. So yeah, with the secondary suites, one of the big changes we are proposing right now is looking at permitting up to 2 suites on one property. Currently, you can only have 1 suite. Depending on the size of your property, you could either only have a basement suite or an attached suite or a detached suite. What we are suggesting is that there could be some properties that are that could be eligible for up to 2 suites. Oh, and the other thing noted here is that we're also looking at changing the size of suites. Right now, we're limited to 90 square meters and 2 bedrooms, and we're suggesting looking at going to 3 bedrooms. And this is just a conceptual cross-section showing a house with a basement suite as well as a detached suite. I should note, of course, detached suites in Nanaimo we often call carriage houses, but they can be known by a variety of names: garden suite, laneway housing. Every jurisdiction calls them something different. So we're just calling it detached suite. Just hopefully it's clear. Another thing we're looking at is reducing the size of the lots that could have a detached suite. Right now, you would have to either be on a lane, or a corner lot, or have an area of 800 square meters. We're proposing changing that to 500 square meters. So smaller lots could be eligible for a detached suite. Oh, and as well as through lots, there are some properties in the city that have effectively 2 front yards. So those lots currently wouldn't be eligible. So we're adding those as well. And this is just showing, a typical property with a detached suite. Now, in a few years ago, the BC Building Code did change to allow for suites in side-by-side duplexes or side-by-side townhouses. This, though, is still restricted by the City of Nanaimo's zoning bylaw. So we're suggesting now an update to permit secondary suites within those side-by-side duplexes and townhouses side-by-side. And we say that specifically because the building code does not permit suites in, say, stacked townhouses or top-down duplexes. Just for the fire separation, they do have to be side-by-side units. So actually, that was it. That's it on the secondary suite side of things. So maybe it probably is easiest. I will just continue through on the infill housing, and then we can talk about suites and infill housing together. So one of the other big things that we're looking at is increasing the supply of kind of some of these smaller scale developments, like 3 units and 4 units. We do have a zone in the city of Nanaimo, the R5 zone, that allows 3 or 4 units. However, there aren't too many properties that are currently zoned R5, and we are finding it isn't a zone that a lot of people are rezoning towards because going through a rezoning process can be quite lengthy, and often we're hearing it's not necessarily worthwhile to go through a rezoning process just to get 3 or 4 units. So we are looking at opportunities to pre-zone or upzone properties where appropriate to the R5 zone. And this is largely informed by the city plan, the new official community plan that the city adopted last July. As part of that, we did designate, we came up with this new kind of designation, the neighborhood designation, that buffers our corridors and urban centers and our suburban neighborhoods. So we're really looking in this neighborhood designation, as well as within a 1 kilometer kind of, walking distance buffer from our downtown. And so what I will show you here, I know it's going to be hard to see on the screen. I think it's also included in your agenda package. This is a map showing in green the lots that we are suggesting could be rezoned to the R5 zone. That's our triplex and fourplex zone. And all of these properties are currently zoned either single family or duplex. Properties that have a higher zoning, we're not suggesting that we're going to rezone. So only the single family and duplex ones. And yeah, it does cover a fair amount of the city, but is largely kind of concentrated around the downtown core. Now, with the pre-zoning for this R5 zone, we're also looking at tweaking the zone. So currently, under that zone, you are permitted 3 units by right, But if you meet one of these criteria, you could have the fourth unit, so going to a fourplex. Or sorry, it's currently actually it's at 1,200 square meters, and we're proposing at reducing that to 800 square meters again. That would be just for the eligibility of a fourth unit in the R5 zone. And this, we've done some very preliminary kind of testing on what you could fit on an 800 square meter lot with the required parking. So we feel like this is an appropriate size lot in order to accommodate 4 units. Also some kind of nitty-gritty details here, maybe of less interest, but still just kind of some changes we're making. We're looking at reducing minimum lot sizes in our infill housing zones, as well as reducing the front yard setback. The front yard setback might be of interest to the panel. I'm sure a lot of you may recall, we do often see front yard setback variances, especially in the smaller infill zones, where we're trying to encourage greater street presence. Often the rationale is, well, one, to provide the street presence, but also to provide a more substantial rear yard and amenity space in the rear, rather than those large front yards, which tend to be more appropriate perhaps in a single family neighborhood. So we are suggesting reducing the front yard setback perhaps to 3 meters in at least some of these zones. So yeah, we'll be interested to hear the panel's comments on that. And this is just showing, again, a cross section. This is showing the what the front yard setback could look like in relation to your typical local road standard, which is what's shown over here. Just reminding everyone, of course, the front yard setback is measured to the property line, not the street. There is quite an amount of space in our Manual of Engineering Standards for a flex zone and sidewalks and other facilities between the street itself and the property line. Another element that we are proposing is regarding the preservation and conservation of older homes. So in the Old City, the Old City zones, which is the R13, R14, and R15, we are proposing a bonus density where an existing building or an existing house from before 1975 is preserved. And this has been somewhat based on a similar program at the City of Victoria, where they do older home conversion policy. And of course, historically, this has been happening in the city. We are just looking for ways to incentivize it where possible. Yes, and one of the last items here related to infill housing, we are talking about amending the R7 zone, which is currently our row house zone in the city of Nanaimo. One of the goals in amending this zone is to kind of create I will say the term missing middle form of density between our existing townhouse zone, which is our low density zone, I should say, which is the R6 zone, and our medium density zone, which is usually apartment buildings. That's the R8 zone. We are hearing from local developers that there is a gap between those two zones. And just for reference, if you want the details, the R6 zone has a density of 0.45, a base maximum density, and the R8 zone has a maximum density of 1.25. So it's a huge gap there between 0.45 and 1.25, and we're finding a lot of projects are coming in around the 0.7 for, especially for these types of infill townhouses. So we're suggesting amending this zone to create something that could accommodate both townhouses and row houses. And I should just clarify, it's kind of it might just be a local Nanaimo terminology thing, but we do just make a distinction where we call a row house is where it's a unit that kind of looks and functions as a townhouse, but is on a fee simple lot. So this image in the bottom right corner here, these are actually all fee simple properties. They have the common party wall agreement with each neighbor, but otherwise there's no strata. It's just you have your property outright like you would if it was a single family home. So it's, very common form of housing, maybe in Eastern Canada, but not so common here on the West Coast. So Yeah, so I think that was just a rundown of some of the infill housing and secondary suite initiatives that we are proposing. I can keep the slides up perhaps if we wanted to go through and now maybe do questions. I'm happy to jump around to any relevant slide. I will maybe leave that, Marie, if you want to go first.
Yeah, it might actually be more helpful to take it down.
Okay, sure.
I see everybody's faces better. Okay. So yeah, I think we'll see if who'd like to comment on this. How about we start with Kevin? Would you like to? You're an old hand here. You've been on this committee for a long time, and you've seen a lot
I
of
figure I
changes in the
should be
city.
done by before what is it, 6
6:30?
o'clock? Yeah, I should be done before 6:30. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Caleb, and thanks to all city staff who were responsible for this report. Very well presented, very easy to review. I support pretty much everything in um, this whole report, and I have mostly just questions and some just minor clarifications and concerns. So, first off, regarding the suites, currently, Caleb, there are in current residential zoning, you're required 2 parking stalls on a single family residential lot. And if you have a secondary suite, you're required 1 extra car off street parking stall. And now, if there is a second suite, are we going to require a 4th parking stall?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, through the chair, it's a good question. So we are currently not proposing to reduce the parking requirements, meaning that for any suite on a property, we would require an additional parking space. So if you were to say have a single family home and 2 suites, that would be a total of 4 parking spaces that are required by bylaw for those uses. And that's part of the reason why we chose the criteria of 800 square meters for the lot and a minimum frontage of 15 meters in order to be eligible for the second suite, because those would be the lots that could accommodate a driveway and a driveway along the side of the house to serve a carriage house and have 4 parking spaces.
Okay, that's good. And I think we all know the concerns regarding parking with suites. Quite often, with a regular attached double garage, you got 2 stalls there, you have 2 stalls in the driveway, you get 4, but there's always going to be concerns that normally the tenant or tenants in this case might have to park on the road. And I know I'm not sure if you've received any negative feedback regarding that, but especially on cul-de-sacs where there's no street parking, there's going to be concerns for that. So I'm glad actually that you're not requiring that additional one, because there's normally 4 stalled parking spaces anyways. In your report, you make reference to the 40% rule of the suite, where the suite cannot exceed 40% of the main dwelling. And I believe under the current bylaw, that is intended for suites within one structure with the dwelling. And I'm assuming that's not going to mean that the total area of both suites cannot exceed 40% of the dwelling. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, the intent is that would apply for the attached suite within the principal building, and then the secondary suite would be limited to up to a maximum of 100 square meters, up to the maximum size of an accessory building that you could have on a lot. So that would limit the size of the detached suite.
Okay, that's right. And in R2 zoning, nothing's changing other than the suite size can be 100 square meters, and the minimum lot size that can contain a suite would be 370 square meters, but would have to still be within the main dwelling.
That's correct, yes. And we're not suggesting at this point to lower the 370 square meter trigger to have a suite. No.
They'll still be permitted to have 1,000 increase from 90 square meters to 100 square meters. Great.
Yes, but keeping in mind that it can't exceed the 40% of the
40%,
building
yeah,
area, so they may
yeah.
not get to 100. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. But that's still really nice because that's been one of our challenges over the years is trying to get a suite big enough to accommodate a family, and especially with only 2 bedrooms. Even though you could have 2 bedrooms and a den, but 3 bedrooms is very difficult to get in that size. So I'm really glad that that's going ahead. The detached suites, did you give any thought to where people have an existing dwelling and they can't put a suite into it, whether or not they could have a 2-story structure with a detached structure, 2 stories with 2 suites, like one up and one down? Did you give any thought to that in your proposal, or is there
We
a
have
reason
not
why?
yet. No, I don't think it has come up yet as part of our internal discussions. It hasn't come up yet. No.
The reason, well, things would have to be amended because the only way you can get the required height restriction, the 7-meter height restriction, is if you have a garage underneath a suite, like a garage on the main floor. That's the only way you can use a 7-meter height. Otherwise, you're using the accessory building height of the 4.55 or 5.5 meter height restrictions.
Well, the accessory building with a suite could go up to 7 meters if it's within the building envelope for the principal
building
building.
envelope, yeah.
Yes, yeah, okay.
That's right. But if you go up to the 5 foot from the
Yeah.
rear property line,
Mhm.
you have to stick to those 14.76 feet or 16.4 feet or 18 feet for the maximum heights, depending on the roof slope. And it'd be impossible to get 2 stories under that. But that was the other thing, whether or not any amendments are going to be made to the bylaw relating to the height of the detached structures.
Yes, and it's a fair question because it has been under discussion. There is some concern, I think, from some of the established neighborhoods around increasing the height of carriage houses in the rear yard setback. I know when carriage houses were first introduced, however long ago that was, 15 years ago
Yeah.
now, it was very important to a lot of the neighborhood groups that height be limited within the rear yard setback. And honestly, to this day, we still do receive complaints that some people feel that the height of those carriage houses is too high. So we may review it, but I don't know if we would be going in a direction of increasing the height within the rear yard setback for detached suites. But it's definitely something we would consider. Where I'm open to feedback.
Yeah, because it was that kind of loophole thing where you if you didn't have any other garage on your property, including attached to the main dwelling, you could build a detached garage with a suite over top in order to get some parking for the main dwelling or for the suite, and then get a suite over top. But quite often that suite over top of that garage would be very limited in size because it would be 400 square feet. It wouldn't be sizable enough for what I think the intention is. But maybe if something is amended there that would allow a 2-story where there is 2 suites in a detached structure to also use that 7-meter, the increased 7-meter height restriction, so that you could get 2 sizable units there. It's something to investigate. I don't know if I can't see anything that could go wrong with that. And that way the existing structure can be left untouched. So something to think about. But other than that, yeah, everything with the suites, I'm very excited about. As for the infill buildings, really like how it was very difficult to look at that map and be able to see it, Caleb. But being that I'm from here and I know the area quite well. From what I can tell on that map, there was the corridors along Labio Road and how it connects to Jinglepot. Those were left unchanged. They're left as residential zones. Is that correct? On the R5 new R5 map. Do you have that?
Sorry, I'm just going to see if I can pull it up here real quick.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why.
Along Labio and Bush
Labio.
Street?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Labio from Bowen Road,
Okay.
heading, I guess, north or west, and where it turns into Jingle Pot is a fairly major corridor, similar to the Uplands Departure Bay corridors, where you've included a lot of R5 across there. And I'm just curious why the Labio Road connecting to Jingle Pot Road all the way down through to Mostar, that didn't have any areas that were changing to R5.
So what I'm just bringing up now, sorry, through the chair, is just this is actually an interactive map we also have available on our website. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll come across well here through Zoom, but I'm just trying to find that exact area. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you have to
So
go down.
oh, I
You have
see
to go
down here.
down.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So from pretty much from Bevan Park, where Labio starts,
Mhm.
starts heading west all the way, and then
Mm.
eventually it winds around and turns into Jingle Pot Road, and then connects into Mostar. That whole corridor. Just curious as to why that was left off an area being converted to R5 zoning.
It's likely that that area was in the suburban neighborhood designation, but I'm just pulling up
Okay.
our city plan now to confirm. And yes, that is the reason. That area was in suburban neighborhood, and we were not looking at properties that are designated in city plan as suburban. We were only looking at
Okay.
those as neighborhood.
Okay. Okay. Good. I think that's all I really have. And I don't even know if it would be a recommendation, but maybe it's something you can investigate whether or not two suites can be put in a detached structure, one up above each other, and increase the height restriction for those. So, other than that, I think it's a very good, very great report, and I fully support everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Angela, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just want to say well done for all the research and time put into this important project. Getting more density in housing in the city is obviously like very challenging and important project. I really like Kevin's idea of the 2 suites and a detached if there's no suite within the existing dwelling unit. I think that might be a very easy way for people to add extra housing and probably very desirable instead of if they just have a single family dwelling right now rather than converting a space into a suite and then building a detached. If they just had to build a detached and then add the 2 suites into that one build, people can still maintain their privacy within their home if that was something that was an issue for them to have a suite inside their home. So anyhow, I think that was a great idea, Kevin. Something I would support investigating further. I was curious for the suite size. I didn't catch what the detached suite, what the limitation of the floor footprint would be on the ground.
Yeah, so currently the maximum size of a detached suite is tied to the maximum size of accessory buildings that you can have on a property, and that is limited to 13% of the lot area up to a maximum of 90 square meters. That's currently. So if we are to increase the size of the suites, we'd also look at possibly increasing that to 100 square meters. So 90 or 13% of the lot size up to a maximum of 100 square meters. So that would likely be where we go. The issue there, those that we do find sometimes, is that's the total area of all accessory buildings. So if you had other accessory buildings on the lot, that would count towards your 90 or soon to be 100 square meters. That would take away from the size of the suite, perhaps.
Right. And currently, do you permit suites above garages? And do you count the garage area as part of the suite, or can you have a suite above the garage and the garage portion is not counted towards the suite? Yeah,
and so I think Kevin did kind of hint at that. So the garage component would be included as part of the floor area unless there is no garage attached to the main house. Then you can get an additional, Kevin had the number, I think, was it 40?
452 square feet.
Right. It's about 42 square meters additional floor area that you can have for that garage, plus the 100 square meters for the rest of the accessory building.
Okay, so there's a possibility to incorporate a garage and suite if you meet the criteria. Okay. Yeah, so I guess one of my main concerns with having a 7-foot detached or 7 meter detached 7 meters. No, I'm getting confused. A larger height for the detached suites than currently permitted is just obviously privacy and viewscapes. And I'm wondering if that can somehow be considered in an application process, or if that's just probably not. I'm just thinking about this issue. Like you say, there's 4.5 meter heights that people are complaining about right now. So maybe, I guess where I'm thinking, if you do go to the full height for suites, but not necessarily for is it the rear lot line?
Yeah. So through the chair, currently you could go up to 7 meters with a accessory building if you're within the principal building envelope, but you can go closer to the rear lot line with your accessory building, but you do have a reduced height if you're within that rear yard area. There is a provision in the bylaw currently that if you do have a suite within the roof structure, you can go up to, and I apologize, I don't have the number in front of me. I think it is almost 7 meters as well, but you would have a dropped roof structure. You wouldn't have a full height ceiling currently. And those are the ones that we even today do sometimes receive complaints about because they can appear as 2-story structures within backyards relatively close to the rear yard of perhaps another property. So we do hear those comments from neighbors, and that's why we haven't proposed increasing that height currently.
Okay. That was just a thought that I had. And then will there be any sort of thought for form and character of suites related to the principal dwelling unit?
Presently, the answer would be no. So in order to do that, we would have to create a development permit area that would apply to detached suites, and each one would be subject to a development permit, albeit it could be a delegated development permit. The feedback so far is that we don't want to subject detached suites for form and character review.
Right. Okay. Is there any sort of, like, during the building permit process, I just know a neighbor, not too close, but they wanted to convert their garage into a suite, but they were told they had to have it somewhat the form and character had to be consistent with the dwelling unit in the neighborhood. So I wasn't sure if that was something that was done through the building permit process to some level.
Typically, no. Building permit through the building permit, they would just be checking for bylaw and code compliance, amongst other things. The only thing I could think of is if it was in the old city and possibly it's the 3rd unit on a lot, then it would be subject to a form and character review.
Okay.
That's the only thing I can think of.
Okay. Yeah, just in terms of the flexible, the front yards, the reduced front yard and rear lot setback. I was curious if anybody had sort of thought about maybe and this is kind of odd, but a flexible front and rear yard setback to be more flexible depending on the lot and the configuration and where it might be. Like, say you want to do a 4.5 meter setback in the rear and 3 in the front on one lot, same zone, but you could switch it around if it was the sort of flexible front and rear lot yard setback just to create flexibility and reduce the amount of variances?
No, that's a good comment. No, I don't think we've explored that yet. I'm just keeping in mind too, in some areas, the front yard setback is also meant to kind of establish some sort of consistency with the front face of buildings. And while that definitely would provide more flexibility, if say that maybe we have a combined total setback between front and rear of a certain amount, it could create flexibility. And I could definitely see there being pros and cons. So perhaps something worth exploring.
Yeah, I can see how, you don't want to affect the street presence, but yeah, I feel like it might be something, if it's not too deviant from each other between 3 and 4.5, it's not too drastic. But anyway, that was just a thought. And otherwise, the one, I know street parking is always a huge problem with new developments where there is a lot of suites, for the neighbors, but especially with kids running through back and forth. I know it's challenging to keep cars off the streets, but in particular with homes that are close to schools, I was wondering if there has been consideration with like keeping off-street parking, and this is maybe outside the scope a little bit, but off-street parking off of school zone areas.
I will say you might have to wait for Lisa's presentation coming up. She will be presenting some family-friendly housing considerations, including parking. So,
okay. On that, I'll just pass it on. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Angela. Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I very much agree with the need for increasing infill and density housing in the city. So I'm very excited to see this. Several of my items had already been covered as well. I had a question about parking reduction as well, especially considering densification in the 1 kilometer proximity guideline. If that's not considered at the moment, I think in the future, maybe it could be considered. I really do agree with the front yard reduction to 3 meters. I know we've had a number of projects come through the design panel recently that have been infilled, and it's been difficult for them to fit the density in the projects while respecting the deeper front yard setback. So I really agree with that one as well. I also had a question about the 2-story detached, and I suppose if it was a 2-story attached, it would essentially follow the triplex rules if you moved in that direction. And then the only other question that I had that wasn't previously covered is, jumping ahead a little bit, would these suites be subject to the adaptability requirements that we're going to hear about in a moment, or are those reserved specifically for multifamily zoned lots?
I can maybe speak to that. So what the city is proposing with regard to adaptable units is not impacting suites or single family dwellings. However, what the province is proposing with regards to adaptable units will impact single family dwellings. I'm not sure about suites though. That's one thing I don't know yet. But I'll get to that though. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, jumping ahead a little bit. But otherwise, those are my comments. Like I said, most of them had been previously covered, but in general, I'm very much in favor of the proposals.
Great, thanks, Jason. Ken? Turn your mic on.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Caleb, for the presentation. I'm totally in support of the proposal and the new zoning and bylaw and restrictions, and things that you have proposed. Just had a few questions. You had a diagram on proposed changes showing a detached suite eligibility. It showed a house in front with parking in front. Does that mean that this could be a lot that has no lane? Is that what you intended, Caleb? That you could
Yeah. So of the criteria, sorry, actually, was this the criteria for having an additional suite? Is that the one you were referring to? Yeah.
It just showed a picture of a suite at the back, a detached suite.
Yeah. So that is correct. We are suggesting that the lots, as long as they are 800 square meters in area or greater, and with a minimum frontage of 15 meters, could be eligible for the attached suite and the detached suite, because not all of the neighborhoods in Nanaimo are serviced by lanes. No.
Yeah, I noticed that, especially in some of the areas that you've indicated where you wanted the higher density. So that means that the setback would that be like an existing house that had been set back, and you could have parking in front?
Yeah, I mean, I think the diagram was just really to show that you could, on a lot of that size, you could have 4 parking spaces. Ideally, they wouldn't all be in front. No, I mean, I think you could have, 2 in a garage and maybe one attached to the carriage house and another somewhere else on the property.
Right.
But I think the idea, these are the same kind of graphics we were presenting to the general public. We just wanted to assure them that, yes, parking would be provided on site for these types of projects.
And my other question was, being on a strata council, if you had a townhouse complex that's stratified, and with these infill suites, what impact does it have on the strata bylaws?
That's a really good question. Yeah, we haven't explored that completely yet. We have been looking at some of the other jurisdictions that have now permitted suites in duplexes and townhouses, but again, it's such a new thing in British Columbia. I think only since 2019 it's been permitted. That I'm not sure what experiences others have had, if it needs to be identified on the strata plan for each individual strata lot, or how they would go about identifying it with the strata plan. I don't know the answer to that yet. It's something we'll be exploring too.
No, it's just who's in control. Is it the owner of the unit, or is it the strata council that has to, enforce the bylaws? Anyways, that was one question. And my only last question would be, in your proposed rezoning, are you trying to encourage assembly of land parcels so that you could have 3 or 4 lots and have 20 units into a group of townhouses or something similar?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. This current zone that we have in the zoning bylaw, the R5 zone, would not do that. It would cap out at 4 units. That's not to say there aren't other zones that could be appropriate if, for example, someone wanted to do kind of the same density but through a larger land assembly. They could rezone perhaps to the R6 zone, which I think I mentioned earlier, which is our low density zone. We haven't suggested pre-zoning to allow for that currently. Where we might see land assembly encouraged is, for example, if the lot was so small that it only could permit, I don't know, 2 or 3 units, then perhaps it could be assembled. But you probably have to get the 4th unit, but you may not get enough gain out of that. So yeah, I don't know if we would see too much there under the R5 zone.
Okay. I was just curious, the way the Vancouver has done some of the corridors, increase the zoning and provided more housing and some interesting. When you assemble a group of lots, you can make a more interesting design, certainly.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think it's a good point. I just wanted to maybe clarify. Right now, we're just talking about kind of the the gentle density, lower density infill in neighborhoods. We do have direction from council as well to explore corridors in our urban centers in the future. So that should be coming, I don't know, later this year, Lisa, or early in the next year. So there will be further discussion maybe around more of those corridor type zones.
Thank you. That's my comments, Madam Chair.
Great, thanks, Ken. Jonathan, do you want to add your comments, questions?
Yeah, overall, I'm supportive of the changes. I just had a question about the reducing the lot size or increasing the maximum building size for secondary suites. If you've looked at how that might affect, if the city has any policies around integrated stormwater management or encouraging infiltration of stormwater on the site, and how an increased lot coverage might affect those goals and policies. I guess you mentioned there's a 13% maximum coverage, I think, Caleb. So that might.
Yeah. We have the 13%, that's just for the accessory buildings, but on a single family lot, there's a total maximum lot coverage of 40%. So that would be for all building footprints combined of 40%. But you're right, we do also have pretty strong stormwater management regulations in the city of Nanaimo. I'm not too familiar with the details of those regulations, but I do know they are fairly significant, and those aren't being proposed to be changed right now. So someone would still have to meet those regulations if they were trying to do an infill housing development of any sort. So that could perhaps be a challenge on some of the smaller lots, and how they would do that, perhaps through retention or detention tanks even below parking areas. That could become more common, although I think we'd prefer more of the naturalized bioswales where possible.
Okay. And then similar comment just for the infill, reducing the lot size from 1,200 square meters to 800 square meters for like duplex or triplexes, fourplexes. I guess that could have, would that affect the maximum site coverage that's allowed?
Yeah, right now for that zone, it's I believe it's 50%. And no, we're not proposing to change that. That would remain at 50% lot coverage. So again, it could be another challenge on some of the smaller lots. Yes, you may be zoned for 4 units, but how viable is it to actually create 4 functional units with the required parking, the lot coverage, and the stormwater? It may not be a viable project on every lot that's zoned for 4 units.
Okay, yeah, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Since we're in the room there, Hillary, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you. Really super interested in you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, really appreciate hearing everyone's comments. I think I would bring some feedback that I heard at the open house that we had about the potential impact on trees. So just making sure that we're, that our tree protection bylaws come up to speed as well, so that we don't lose a lot of our urban trees, making room for secondary suites. So we find a balance there. And then potentially not related to form and character, but if we're allowing more secondary suites, how do we ensure that they don't all turn into Airbnbs? And I really liked the point about whether you could do the stacked secondary suite and one on top, because there's a lot of questions about how to make these additional units accessible for people as we try to find like ground floor options for people that aren't just basements or carriage houses that include stairs. So yeah, thank you for everyone's comments. It's really helpful to get your expertise on this.
Great, thanks, Hillary. And last but not least, Hector, would you like to put in your comments there?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, very good comments from everyone. Yeah, density, we need to increase density. That's nothing new. I think the most interesting part is about the lot coverage, the last comment. I know like our main function is about like form and character, but yeah, it will be interesting if you guys can give some more lot coverage in exchange of something. If there's like a, increasing the performance of the house, if it's a passive household, they can get like, I don't know, 60% of lot coverage. Because at the end of the day, yeah, we want functional units and not just like one bedroom units that are gonna end on Airbnb. Because again, if they're too small to be like a livable units, people are gonna make them work for their convenience. But yeah, no, I think as overall, it's a great idea. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's see what I've got here on my list that hasn't been covered. Kevin, you want to add something?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to just comment on Councillor or Hillary's comment, Councillor Eastmere's comment about stacked. If we did look at a way to make suites in a detached structure stackable, but in doing so, the bylaw would have to be amended to allow for a higher height restriction, because currently that cannot be done under the current bylaw. But if one of the conditions was that the lower floor, the main floor unit, be made accessible, then that would be one of the conditions to allow the buildings to be stacked. It might be a way to climb on board what Lisa's going to be talking about regarding accessible buildings. So just something I just want to throw out there. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks to the staff for these reports. They've been really thorough, and a lot of it went over my head, but and I look at it from a little bit different perspective as not being an architect or a builder. So I was kind of looking at it again from our mandate, in the sense that we need to look at form and character. And I in your report, Caleb, there was a quote, I think it was from maybe the City of Vancouver, what infill housing was. And that's housing that fits within an existing neighborhood without significantly altering its character or appearance. And I really liked that definition, because I think it sort of points to one of the problems that we have with a lot of these, particularly the infill housing, where we have developers come in the neighborhood and propose things that don't really fit in or look like they fit. And of course, it gets the neighbors all riled up. It's not only adding density, but it's not fitting in. It's changing the whole character of the city. And infills do that. So one of the problems I think that can arise out of this too is it makes all these single family homes, if you're going to rezone, makes them very accessible to infill. And you might have a situation, which I've seen happen in Vancouver, where developers buy up all the property, tear down very good houses that are perfectly all right to live in, and put infills in. And it just, again, totally transforms the neighborhood very rapidly. And I think that's probably what the community is very frightened of when we start talking infill. So I'm not sure, is the city considering this issue and how they might address it? And I think infill still have to come before the design advisory panel. So, but I don't know if that really has a lot of effect in the end either. So I'm just wondering if you want to comment on that.
No, those are very good questions. Yes. So I guess first of all, to your last question, I should have clarified earlier. For the most part, we would expect that no, any of the infill projects would likely not be going to the design panel. So this might be your one chance to provide comments on these types of housing. The reason being is last year with the adoption of City Plan, we increased the exemptions for form and character DPs to 4 units or less would now be exempt from a form and character DP unless there is a variance or it's in the old city. The reason being that there are such strong design guidelines and an interest in those guidelines in the old city. So if you're outside of the old city and you weren't applying for variances, you could theoretically go straight to building permit with an infill project of 4 units or less. Now, that's still something we're discussing. When we introduced that last year, that was before we had even been discussing pre-zoning to allow for 4 units. So it's still part of the discussion that staff are having, whether that still makes sense. Of course, a lot of other jurisdictions that have introduced infill housing, they do have a delegated development permit process that goes with it. So it's different in every jurisdiction, but it's something we are looking at. The other comment I was going to make about the transformation of different neighborhoods, we have been mindful of that as well. And I mean, it's part of the reason too that we haven't proposed to eliminate single family zoning across the entire city. We were only looking at areas where it would be appropriate given the scale of the existing neighborhood, proximity to amenities, as well as servicing, where we're able to provide services to that infill housing, rather than just saying, okay, the whole city could be now zoned for infill, which could have a wider impact. But no, I think they're fair comments and things we're discussing internally.
And are you discussing this with the community associations? Because I look at your map of the areas that you are changing the zoning on, and some of them I would think that the community might not be too pleased to see that their neighborhood is being turned into this area where the houses then are going to be raised, could be raised and changed.
Yeah, we have shared it with all the community associations, and we're getting feedback. But one thing I would point out, it probably wasn't clear if you're just looking at that one map, is that we the old city, so the areas directly surrounding Nanaimo, are already zoned, in fact, for an infill housing. So we do have we have 3 zones actually, R13, R14, and R15, which have been zoned for quite some time at a slightly higher density. And often in those areas, we do see adaptive reuse of homes, but they've been zoned that way I don't even know for how long, but we haven't seen people tearing down every home in the old city and replacing it with a new one. So I think we kind of look at that as an example of how the infill housing can happen in an existing neighborhood. Granted, of course, they do have the stronger design guidelines, but we haven't seen a rush of people to tear down homes just because they have that zoning.
Well, yeah, okay. Probably one of the things I would want to recommend is that there are some checks and balances on the form and character, if it's not going to come before the design panel, that any of these new buildings have some sort of check in terms of fitting into the neighborhood, and out of respect for the other owners in the area, and that they're we end up, and I think one of the benefits is that we end up with sort of a consistent character, or some sort of character in the neighborhood that doesn't look like all over the map and that kind of thing. So that would be my one primary concern here. In terms of the secondary suites, I think everybody's really covered all of the issues that I had with it. Other than that, I think Ken's comment about the strata, I'm also under strata, and I can just see a real nightmare in terms of how you deal with that with the strata council if one of the owners decides they want to have a suite in there. So I think that's something that you're going to have to really research, and that, of course, that's governed by BC law, strata law, and so on. So there's a sort of a larger issue there that's not just concerning us. So that would be one of my concerns. I think it's sort of an interesting idea when I think of the brownstones in some of the American cities, and you've got suites down in the basement, but they have a way of entering those suites separately, so they can be sort of almost like an up and down duplex. But a lot of our townhouses here, I'm not sure how well that would work. So it'd be kind of interesting to see. And the other thing, the front yard setback of the parking, which was brought up, I'd also want to, kind of concerned that we'd end up with a lot of parking in the front of a building. And I thought that was something we're trying to discourage in the city, where we have parking in the front yard, in the front of a building, even with commercial and other constructions that we've dealt with in this panel. So again, I'm wondering if there needs to be some checks and balances in terms of how, if somebody's adding suites to their property, how they're going to handle the parking. Or do we end up having a whole front yard that's a parking lot?
That is that's another good question. Right now, if someone were to have a single family home and they wanted to put in a suite, really all we're checking is that they can provide it on site. So meaning that it's not on the street, of course, that it's on their private property. Whether that's in the front yard within a private garage or in the rear, we don't really look at that as part of a bylaw compliance check. Again, that's just for a single family home with a suite. In fact, we actually have our front yard setback regulations written in such a way that we anticipate there being parking in front of the garage. We actually have a greater setback for garage doors of 6 meters compared to the house, which would be 4.5 meters, and that's specifically to accommodate vehicles parking in front of a garage. But no, it is a good question too, and we don't have any way of enforcing where that parking is necessarily. As long as it can meet adequate access and it meets the bylaw, then it could be approved.
So somebody could propose that they've got a double garage already with parking. They could propose taking out some of their front lawn and putting a parking.
The one thing that restricts that a little bit is the engineering requirements for driveway access. So it's not like you can have the whole front yard be a driveway access. You know, they are limited in width for that. So that sometimes makes it tricky. Then you have to, you know, be creative in how you park in your front yard. So that limits it. It does limit it.
Yeah. And so what we do see happen sometimes then is you have the limited width of the driveway, but once you get onto the property, then you could have stalls come into what would otherwise be a front yard perhaps. And we wouldn't have any regulations to stop that from happening.
Great. That's it on my list. It hasn't been covered already. Okay. All right. Well, I think you guys want to vote on this. I believe you want to vote. Yeah. Okay. That we support it and with recommendations. I'm hearing a few recommendations. One, to look into the possibility of doing stacked suites in the backyard. I'm not sure if that's how we want to phrase it. Okay. Also look at the issue of possibly for trees and how we retain trees when there's being suites being added or an infill. Would that be appropriate, Hillary? Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because again, this is another thing with infills. Often all the trees are chopped down and it's housing and parking lot become the issue. And do we want to have a recommendation about possibility of Airbnbs? It's not really form and character, I guess. That doesn't really fall under our mandate.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would say it's something that I think it would be good for them to look into. I don't know how they can control it unless there's something in the bylaw that states that detached suites cannot be used as B&Bs, which I don't think they have anything in place. I don't think they can really put anything in place because a lot of people like to use buildings as Airbnbs. So I think that's a totally different matter. Whether or not we would like for them to investigate it further, I'm not sure.
I just sorry through the chair to quickly comment. We do have short-term rental regulations in place, and we are reviewing that, I should say, what the impact would be if we allow for 2 suites on a property. We may be limiting it so that the second suite could not be permitted to have a short-term rental. So I just wanted to assure the panel that we are reviewing that as part of this.
Also to say that the short-term rental, well, I think, when was that adopted, Caleb?
2020?
Yeah. So it's been a few years, and we have direction from council to bring back a report to review that, to see, you know, if we do need to, you know, what have been the complaints, and you know, do we need to increase enforcement, and what resources would be required for that, and some options for that. So that is actually part of our suite of housing projects for 2023, is to review the short-term rental regulation.
Okay, and then I'd like to see a recommendation that the staff review ways to ensure adequate form and character with infills and or suites that are being added in these neighborhoods. I'm not sure if anybody else agrees with that, but that would be one I would add. And I think that was just be those 3, or did I miss something? Angela?
It doesn't have to be a recommendation, but I think Caleb made a note of it anyways, just idea of flexible setbacks.
Oh, okay. Look into flexible. Having flexible setbacks, certainly. Front and back.
Yeah, front and rear flexibility.
Okay. So I'll just go over those recommendations. So number one, for the staff to look into possibility of having one suite on top of another in a secondary building on a property. Number two, review the tree bylaws to review whether infills and additional suites will reduce the tree cover, and look into the possibility of having flexible setbacks, front and rear setbacks, and also to ensure that there's some regulations in place to ensure consistent form and character with the neighborhood on infills and additional suites. So with those recommendations, does somebody want to make a motion to recommend this proposal? Kevin? And then seconder, Ken? All in favor? Okay. We can say we're recommending it on that basis. Great. So thanks a lot, Caleb. And I think the next one presentation is by Lisa.
Yeah.
On adaptable housing in Nanaimo.
I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Oh, what do you want to see? Are you seeing the correct screen? I feel like we've been using Teams. I haven't used Zoom for a while.
That's good.
Yeah? Okay. So, thank you, everyone. Yeah, one of the directions from council also was to look at ways to increase adaptable housing in the city. And so we did start this project over a year ago, actually, and we retained an economist to look at the financial implications of that for in multi-unit buildings to require adaptable units. However, as we were working on this project and we were researching what other municipalities have been doing in BC, so there are, especially in the Lower Mainland, municipalities that do require 100% or 50% of the units in a multi-unit building to be adaptable. So we were drawing from their experiences. However, in the meantime, the province has been, I think mid-2023, announced that they're proposing changes to the BC Building Code to require adaptable units. So we decided to continue on with this project because it was well on its way, and just in case things didn't happen at the provincial level. But what we're learning now, here we are in September, and we're learning it is quite likely that the BC Building Code will change, and there will be requirements in the BC Building Code for adaptable units that actually are more rigorous than what we were proposing here at the city level. So just to, and I apologize, you don't see that in this staff report, but we just weren't sure where it would go at the provincial level. So I can just let you know that in new, larger 4-story apartment buildings and condo buildings, 100% of the units would have to be adaptable. And in a smaller apartment or condo building, all first-floor units would be adaptable. And also changes are proposed for single-family dwellings and townhouses. And I'm not sure about secondary suites. So that question had come up earlier. So maybe what is adaptable housing? Adaptable housing refers to housing with the potential to accommodate all community members, regardless of their physical abilities. And so an adaptable unit is a term used in the BC Building Code. So it's a basic unit that allows for future conversion and individualized upgrades to meet the specific accessibility needs of a tenant, resident, or owner. So features that you would see of an adaptable unit are wider doorways, maneuvering room at dwelling unit entries and corridors, access to a main floor bathroom, reinforcement of walls for grab bars, and accessible door handles, switches, and outlets. And so, and when you hear the term accessible unit, that usually means a unit that has been designed for specific accessibility needs. So whether the person is in a wheelchair or blind, in that unit, they would have different needs. And so an adaptable unit could be converted to be accessible for those specific needs. So what we're talking about here is the requirement for a basic adaptable unit in accordance with the BC Building Code. So what the city was proposing is that in a multi-unit development of 10 or more units require that 50% of the residential units meet the basic adaptable unit standard. However, as I mentioned, the province is actually considering requiring 100%. And then what the city was proposing is that in seniors housing, 100% of units be adaptable, meet the basic adaptable unit standard. And we're certainly not seeing that. We haven't been seeing that in the city to date. A seniors development in 2022 with 62 units, only 12 of them were adaptable. So that's what we're getting at on a voluntary basis. And so right now in Schedule D of the zoning bylaw, so Schedule D is our density bonus for multi-unit developments. So if multi-unit development is permitted, additional density is permitted when certain amenities are offered. So currently in Schedule D, we do say if you meet, if 10% of units are adaptable, then you get a density bonus. So that would need to be reconsidered, particularly if and revised. If the province is requiring 100%, then this would need to be reviewed. So that's a short presentation on the adaptable. And like I say, we really do think the province is going to go ahead with changes to the BC Building Code. They could be in place by January 2024. So yeah, that's my short presentation.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So it sounds like everything's really kind of in flux there. So
yeah,
we'll keep our comments with that in mind. Why don't we reverse things here? We'll, how about Hillary, would you like to comment on this one?
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's a great step, and it's interesting the province is moving on this as well, and it's just interesting to hear your feedback. And I also had a chance to hear our advisory committee on accessibility and inclusivity speak to this, which I found really interesting. And they were sort of saying the adaptable unit it's good, but it's almost kind of a cop-out to making actually accessible units, because the cost of adapting a unit down the road may be prohibitive and landlords might not be interested, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, for me, it's just really interesting to hear your feedback in conjunction with that. And I think this is a good direction for us to go. But whether people will actually take advantage of the adaptability, question mark, but it's a good idea, I think.
Great, thanks, Hillary. Let's see, Ken. Turn your mic on.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Lisa, for the presentation. I fully support this recommendation, and I really don't have many questions. I think it's all obvious and what they want to do. And if you go through the building codes, you can see what changes would be required. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ken. Hector? You get to turn your mic on.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, I heard the same rumor about like the changes in the building code. I would say, let's just wait, or I don't know if there can be a provision just to adaptable housing to match whatever the BC building code would require. Again, I think, as you say, it's an influx situation, and let's just wait. My only question, Lisa, is there like a provision, or can it be a bylaw to actually ask for adaptable No, for like accessible units, say like 10% needs to be accessible from day one, not like adaptable. Is that right?
Yeah, in our research with The Economist, who did a study for us, is the tricky part is there's so many different accessibility needs. So you almost need to know who the unit is for in order to design it for that specific need. So that's one comment on that. And I think it's for that reason that BC Housing actually has a grant program for changing an adaptable unit to be accessible for a specific person. Yeah.
Great,
And,
thank you.
mhm.
Yep, no more questions from me. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Hector. Jonathan?
Thank you. I am supportive of those changes. I don't have any comments from a landscape perspective on that one.
As long as the walkways are wheelchair accessible, right?
Yeah, I guess the BC Building Code probably already requires that for like 10 plus unit buildings.
Right. Okay, and Jason?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm in support of this as well. I think the ability to accommodate aging in place is an important aspect of housing and housing stock. So I'm absolutely in favor of it. To address Councillor Eastmere's concerns, I would say it's not really so much of a cop-out as by making the units adaptable, the real infrastructure is already in place, accommodating for accessible bathrooms, entryways, things like that is in place. It's just a matter of making sure the infrastructure is there so that there's blocking in walls for handbars and things like that. It's not really a significant upgrade to do something like that, but not strictly necessary for most people. And to Lisa's point, accessibility comes in a lot of different flavors. So one size does not necessarily fit all. And so adaptable means that we can accommodate a wider range of tenants in our community. So I'm all for encouraging and increasing the adaptability of our housing. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Jason. Angela, I think.
Sorry, if I could just add one more thing about that, from the accessibility committee, the language that they suggested was like universal design, and I think that's sort of where I think we're headed with this adaptability, where it's built in such a way that it's universally accessible.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was just going to say something similar to Hector. What Hector was alluding to was if you could incorporate a specific number of units that could be retrofitted to such a degree that it would be easier to create an accessible unit for somebody with special needs. So I don't know if, how that would be possible through BC Building Code, or if you could create a unit that, say you had 5% or 10% of the units that were had even more ability to be customized to be accessible to whatever needs. But anyhow, that was just a thought. Obviously, this whole project is in flux right now with the BC Building Code changing, and obviously really great changes on the horizon for those with needs, accessibility needs. I was just wondering if this would somehow translate into looking at parking and or accessible, modes of transportation that is evolving, like electric carts and electric scooters, and if these, I know there's kind of separate, but maybe they're kind of joined, like with seniors housing specifically. There's a lot of new technology with modes of transportation, so being electric. So I don't know if those two things might tie in together with this study, but I just had throwing that idea out there to if it somehow it might be connected and be looked at through this study.
If I may, through the chair, I think that's I think particularly if the province does go ahead with the new BC building code and requiring all the adaptable units, I think all municipalities will need to take a look at their parking bylaws and how their accessible parking requirements and how that's, out of line or in, and we'll be reviewing that as well. I may also add one project scheduled for this year and next year, which the design panel would be excited about, is new development permit design guidelines for multifamily, commercial and industrial. And so we actually have a request for proposals out right now for a consultant to do that work. So there is an opportunity very soon through that work to really, make our design guidelines more robust for adaptability, for getting from parking space to the front door and allowing for the different modes of transportation that you're talking about as well.
Okay, great, interesting. Thank you, and that was all I had to add. Thank you for the presentation.
Great, thanks, Angela. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Lisa. Very nice report. Did the staff look at making it a requirement that a certain percentage of the units actually be made accessible, not just adaptable?
Yeah, that was one of our first kind of, what is the difference, adaptable and accessible, and looking at what other municipalities have done. And, the tricky thing is what we've heard and what we learned is that there's so many different types of needs out there. And so I think, the work was sort of done at, in the BC Building Code, and I think at the National Code as well, is what is needed for a unit for basic standards in order to allow for that adaptability. So we're relying on the BC Building Code minimum requirements for an adaptable unit. There have been municipalities who do have guidelines for additional features, but not too many have done that, and can be a little bit clunky, I think, from what we learned. And it is another level of review for our building inspectors to review multifamily development buildings, so we're not proposing at this time another level of accessibility design. That would be another project. We'd require a specialist, right, with those skills.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm struggling is I look at it from an accessibility standpoint for the most part. I look at it from a wheelchair accessibility, at least the one that would probably affect construction the most. And it's anybody can adapt a building for wheelchair accessibility. They can tear out a wall, they can renovate a bathroom. So it's a matter of what's going to be finite in these guidelines or these recommendations as to what would be considered deemed minimally acceptable design for what it's going to be adaptable. You could say, well, somebody can move this wall over to make the hallway 4 feet. We can renovate the bathroom later. The plumbing's in place. We can create a 5-foot diameter turning circle for a wheelchair. But, who would really put the cost in to do it? So really what should be put in place in these is, should it be that, you have to have a certain amount of criteria, like one bedroom has to have a 3-foot door to allow for a wheelchair, having an accessible bathroom that has a 5-foot diameter turning circle, 4-foot hallways. Do those have to be in place in 50% of these units to make it work? I'm not sure, but I think something finite has to be in place. You can't just say, well, you're allowed to adapt this unit, but then you're going to spend $20,000 or whatever renovating the unit. So I'm not sure if you've looked at that or whether or not anything's going to be finite for that.
Through the chair, and I'll comment, but maybe if one of the architects wants to help me out, feel free. But the BC Building Code basic adaptable unit standard does require that wider doorways is a requirement. Maneuvering room at dwelling unit entries and corridors is a requirement. Access to a main floor bathroom, and reinforcement of walls for grab bars and accessible door handle switches and outlets. So that's just a few of the basic requirements. I mean, there is a whole section of the BC Building Code with more information, and I don't know if one of the architects wanted to help.
Well,
me
maybe
out there, but
Jason, maybe Jason or Hector can and can help me with that. Whether or not a 5-foot diameter turning circle is a requirement in adaptability for a unit.
Yeah, 5-foot turning radius or 1.5 meters, according to the BCBC, is the requirement on that. And then
diameter,
also,
right?
And it as references also height and reach requirements that require switches to be lower than typical, or outlets that are normally maybe 15 inches off the floor to be higher, so that from a wheelchair or seated position you can actually reach it from various locations. Countertop surfaces are at different elevations, things like that. So it does impact a number of items within a home for sure.
Okay, thank you, Jason. My only other comment is for Lisa is, did you consider maybe doing this? What I'm worried about is whether or not this could potentially stall potential developments initially. Maybe there'll be a rush before this gets implemented to get permits in. But did you consider maybe instead of jumping right to 50%, maybe doing it at 30% of the building for the first couple of years and jumping to 50%, any sort of staged system?
It's a good comment, and we did present this to the development community yesterday, and but I think everyone kind of feels like the BC Building Code is going to change, and that will happen for January 2024. So yes, we do expect to rush a building permit application by the end of the year. But if that provincial initiative stalls for whatever reason, then your idea maybe has merit. So yeah,
I just put it out there because I know in dealing with building codes and issues like this, everyone will rush to get their permits in. They might not start them right away. They'll apply for extensions on their permits, and everything kind of gets drawn out. And but if there's a way to maybe make it easier for architects and developers to understand that maybe instead of 50% of the units, maybe 25, 30%, it might be a little bit easier over the long run. I'm not putting it in there as a recommendation, but it's just something if you thought about that, that's all. But aside from that, I fully support this. Again, this is well overdue. So well done. Thanks, Lisa.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Well, I will concur with all of that. I think this is a long overdue thing, and I actually would like to see the 100%, because I really feel that people should be able to maintain live in their own home and not be institutionalized if they have to be, if they end up needing more care and need more accessibility things. But I also understand, I think, Lisa, where you're coming from. I think we can only build or ask builders to build an adaptable space, and as long as it's got that width, if people only have to then adapt certain things, like sometimes bringing the counter further down for somebody in a wheelchair is a lot easier than having to go in and adapt a whole bathroom, for example. But I'd want to see all of the building codes to see if they actually are committed to that. For example, you say an accessible bathroom down on the main floor, but what about how do you shower somebody who can't stand up? And so you've got a bathtub in there, which is kind of useless to somebody who, these are the kinds of renovations that are going to be really important that with somebody who has mobility issues and that sort of thing. But like you say, I think those needs are so individualized that I don't think it's fair to even ask developers to build them unless something very specific, unless they know they have a set group of clientele. But then we're also then ghettoizing those people into certain buildings. So what I like about this is it means somebody with disability issues or mobility issues can live in any building they want, as long as they can adjust that sort of basic frame to their needs. And I think changing this rule would really help. So I'm certainly in favor of it, and hopefully the BC government will go 100%. I think that's great. So thank you for your presentation. Okay, I don't know if I'm here. I didn't think I heard any recommendations on this one. Correct me if I'm wrong. No? Okay. So we can go ahead, and somebody wants to make a motion to support this particular proposal. Okay, Angela, seconder Jason, all in favor? Great. Okay, so good luck with it, and you may not have to even present it if the BC government changes their rules, I guess. Okay, thanks. So you're doing the next presentation?
Yes, I
Okay.
am. I'll share my screen.
Probably maybe I just managed to get this in. We'll see. Okay.
Okay, let's see what we can do. Do my best. See here. Are you seeing it? Is it small for you? Or is
No,
it...
it's there. It's good.
Okay, excellent. All right, so another project council asked us to pursue, and there's policy and city plan and the affordable housing strategy to encourage the construction of more family-friendly housing in the city. Oh, wait, it's not. There we go. So what is family-friendly housing? It's a dwelling unit that contains 2 or more bedrooms and supports households with more than 2 people. So when we took a look at the numbers, and we have a housing needs report that was completed in May of this year, it's available on the city website. And what we learned from the housing needs report is that actually we have enough 2 and 3 bedroom units, and that's partly because Nanaimo has been a single family dwelling kind of city for up until, well, it probably still is. It's just recently we're starting to build more and more multifamily buildings. So there is quite a few, enough technically, 2 and 3 bedroom units in the city of Nanaimo. But of course, those single family dwellings aren't attainable or affordable for many families. And so there is a need for 2 and 3 bedroom units in rental apartments, stratas, and townhouses, and just forms of housing that's, I don't want to say affordable because that's not always the case anymore either, but at least somewhat more attainable. And so we took a look. There actually isn't that many municipalities in BC that have minimum requirements for family-friendly units. And New Westminster was implemented this requirement in 2016 and has been quite successful there. So working with our economist who helped us with this project, we have modeled what we're proposing for the city of Nanaimo based on New Westminster. And according to the planners there, it has been working well and not receiving too much pushback from the development community. So what's being proposed is that for any zone where a multi-unit development is already a permitted use, and then where the development is 10 or more units, requiring a minimum of 30% of the units must be 2 bedrooms and 10% must be 3 bedrooms. So that would still mean 70% could be 1 bedroom or bachelor units. So that's the primary change that's proposed. Also, in Schedule D, so as we mentioned, Schedule D is where density bonus, more floor area is allowed when different amenities are offered. And so one thing through city plan consultation we learned is that more family-friendly units are needed, more attainable family-friendly units are needed near schools, and prefer that they be ground-oriented. So apartments, maybe a 3-bedroom apartment on the ground floor of a building is preferred as opposed to upper story. So when a development is offering both of these features, being near a school or ground-oriented, then additional density would be awarded potentially. Another recommendation or option staff have put forward is, you may be familiar with the City of Nanaimo's policy for consideration of a parking variance. And when we were doing the research for this project, we did learn from the development community that, it's expensive to build underground parking. And so requiring having a 3-bedroom unit in a multifamily development, then you're requiring more parking. We didn't want it to be a disincentive. So considering a variance for 3-bedroom units when underground parking is provided. So that's my short presentation about the family-friendly, what's being proposed for requiring family-friendly housing. We did present this to the development community yesterday, and so we got some really good feedback, and yeah, interested in design panel's comment.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, Jonathan.
Am I good? Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm supportive of those changes. Yeah, I don't see, yeah, from a landscape perspective, I guess, I don't know, this might be out of the scope of these changes, but yeah, I guess more family-friendly units might also be benefited by having outdoor amenity space for families, because I think it's more important for, especially with children, having on-site outdoor space for kids to play and stuff. So that could also be something that's missing on 2 or 3 bedroom units in multifamily projects. So, but yeah, that's my only comment. But yeah, overall, I'm supportive of those new policies.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. That's a good point. Okay, Angela.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I'm really happy to hear that the City of Nanaimo is really thinking about family-friendly developments. I support everything that's been presented. Like my comment in Caleb's presentation, I don't know how it can correlate, but I do feel like there is some safety provisions that need to be considered with on additional on-street parking with children and not having the visual, the periphery coming out between vehicles and right onto streets, and also within school zones where there's a lot of families walking to the schools. A lot of people that are parking on the streets are sort of blocking the actual walkway, where now the kids are walking on the road to get to school, or wherever there isn't an actual sidewalk, I guess. A lot of the newer developments have sidewalks, but a lot of the older neighborhoods don't necessarily have raised sidewalks where cars are not parking. So I don't know if that could be a part of the consideration, is if these additional units are going in with higher density, more parking in neighborhoods that don't have sort of raised sidewalks, then consider these. Maybe they have to build the sidewalks up. I don't know, but that would be so incremental, it might not be feasible. So anyhow, I just wanted to put that forward, my safety concerns with on-street parking and children not having the visuals and having to walk on the streets. Aside from the safety aspect with the on-street parking, where there isn't raised sidewalks, didn't really have any other comments at this time. So I'll just pass it on at that.
Thanks, Angela.
If I may, through the chair, so maybe just 2 comments. For a multi-unit development, there would be for sure the requirement to build sidewalk along the frontage of the property. Also, our multi-unit developments where they're permitted, where the zoning allows for those, tends to be in our urban center and corridor areas where we are targeting infrastructure improvements and improved transit and mobility options. So you will see that is where that is what city plan was really all about, is making our investments efficient to our corridors and urban centers so we can service our multi-residential developments and the people living there accordingly.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, I guess it just tweaked my mind too, like when you say additional density where they're close to schools, etc. I think of Solaire. I lived in Solaire. There's no raised sidewalks there. They're big school zone and lots of people parking on the road. And anyway, that's just where my mind was going. But I'm sure there's other examples through the city, but just just bringing that out there. So thank you.
Okay, and Hector?
Hi, thanks. No, I think I support the idea. I think it's a great idea. My only comment, and it's maybe more from a developer perspective or from giving more options, is can we swap? Is there like any provisions for swapping instead of 30% of family friendly to provide maybe daycare facility or a communal kitchen or some sort of other like facilities that will help families to stay on the area without having to go to different areas? Yeah.
Good comment.
Would you consider that, or it's really not in the scope of the proposal?
I mean, it hasn't been considered, but I think it's a good comment. I think, we do have, as part of Schedule D in the density bonus provisions, being near a daycare is awarded a bonus, but not to include space for that in a multifamily building. So it's a good comment. Yeah, we haven't considered it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Hector. Ken? Turn on your mic.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Lisa, for the presentation. Yeah, I'm really supportive. My only concern is what the size of the units of 2 and 3 bedroom units are. I mean, I've seen a rental across the street from us. They have 3 bedrooms for, they're around 1,000 square feet, and that's not friendly. I don't think it's very family friendly for people to live on top of each other like that in 1,000 square feet. I mean, I had a unit that was 1350, and it was probably a 3-bedroom size, and that would have been comfortable, I think, but it's quite a bit different than, 30% bigger than what the unit was across the street. Anyways, that was my only concern, and I don't know how you control that other than when you get to the building permit, or we don't even look at it at a design development stage. So that was my only comment, Madam Chair. Otherwise, I'm really supportive of it.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. And Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Lisa, again. A very nice presentation. My only question for you is, in your report, you make, I think, a couple times the sentence where multifamily is currently present use. Does that mean if somebody wants to rezone property down the road to be multifamily, these would not apply?
No, it would apply also. So we just mean to say we're building it right into the zone. So if someone were to rezone to the R8 or, a corridor zone, then it would, multi-family use would be permitted. So it would be applied to them as well.
Okay. I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what I thought. Thanks,
Yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah, no
Thanks,
problem.
Madam Chair.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Jason?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Really great. Again, I'm really supportive of the initiative. The only question that I had were related to the incentives. I was looking through the document that was provided as part of the agenda around the consideration of parking reduction and the density bonus, but I didn't see any specific details of it. Specifically for the parking, it looked like the sentence, I think, said something about the city would consider a variance as part of the approval stage. Is there going to be any provision that provides developers more of a certainty around that as they're going through the design stage, that they can count on certain reductions, or are they kind of heading into the development permit phase with their fingers crossed in terms of what they're planning for in their developments? That's my only question.
It's a good question, and certainly if that's something Design Advisory Panel would like to recommend, then you may. That we just, I think as staff, just know that council receives a great deal of complaints about parking, particularly in the newer multifamily developments that are occurring in the city. And so, we did talk about wanting to build it right into the parking bylaw. So there was that certainty you were looking for. And they're like, well, I don't think that will get supported by council at this stage. Maybe what about just putting it in the policy for consideration of a parking variance? And I'm not even sure the council I've already heard maybe mixed thoughts about that from the council members. So that is the one of all the things between Caleb's presentation and mine, that's sort of the one sticky point that does come up, and I get very polarized comments on that one point. Mm-hmm.
The third rail in Nanaimo politics is parking. Got it.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Jason. And Hillary?
Yeah, appreciate hearing the feedback. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the parking variances are going to be a necessary thing, and we're just going to have to get it done. That's my take. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Lisa, for this. I'm looking forward to, moving forward on this.
Thanks, Hillary. Okay, I don't think I really have much to add, except I think this is a great initiative. I really think that there's a real shortage of housing that's family friendly in this town, and I think your idea of sort of insisting on ground level units and making sure that there's an adequate ground level units for young families or whatever, people with more than a number of people in the family. So that's excellent, and don't think I have anything else to add on that. So thank you. I think the committee's basically in support of it. Do we want to include any recommendations? I heard a few things mentioned, for example, the need to consider sufficient outdoor amenity space when adding more family units, and also maybe a need to consider an increase on street parking in the area with, consider the issues around street parking in the area where there's more children present. Also, I need to consider that parking variance very carefully. So, do we want to add those three? Is people in agreement with that? Yeah, okay. So, 3 recommendations then. Need to consider that there is sufficient outdoor amenity space when adding more family units. Need to consider the issues of street parking in an area with more children. Need to have some sort of, Miss Ken's point about need to look at the parking variance, and I'm not sure, Ken, if you wanted to make your point about the size of the units, the recommendation.
No, it'll come up.
I agree with you. No 3 closets, 1 bedroom and 2 closets.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of these apartments are pretty small. Okay. Well, can I get a motion to accept the proposal as presented with those 3 recommendations then? Jason? Okay, and seconder Ken, all in favor? Great, excellent. Okay, well, I think that wraps that up. All we need to do, is there anybody, any other comments from city staff or anybody else want to make any last minute points?
if I may, so I don't know if you did had a chance to look at the Get Involved page. There was a link to it provided, I think, in the detachment, but there is a survey online as well that you can complete with regards to all of these subtopics. So please feel free to share it with your networks. We are looking for input for the full month of September on these 4 initiatives. And yeah, so thank you for your time.
When do you take them to council?
Well, we will compile all the input during October and consider what, what changes may be needed. And we hope to present, and I think it depends on what we receive, whether we need to touch base with the community again, or whether we can go directly to council. We do hope to do that by the end of the year, but I would expect, a public hearing would be required because it's amendments to a zoning bylaw, and I expect that would be in early 2024 before that whole process completed.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you to both you and Caleb for coming in and doing that. So great. Okay. Kevin?
Yeah, just one last thing. Is Caleb still around?
He's right there. Yep. He just popped in.
Caleb, with the secondary suites, I know it's going to be applying to R1 zoning. Is it going to apply to R10 steep slope zoning as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. Currently, secondary suites are permitted in any zone that allows for a single residential dwelling. So the same would be true as with the additional suite. What we haven't determined yet is how that would work on an R10 lot, where you could have a number of single residential dwellings on a single lot, and if each of those have a suite, if they could have a detached suite as well. We haven't determined that yet. I think R10 is going to be the one complicated lot on how we address that.
Yeah, because currently, if you have an 1,800 square meter lot, you can put 3 houses on it. But I think if you did that, you are not permitted to have suites currently.
Currently, that is correct. Yeah,
okay.
And it's quite possible we would keep that in place, given that we are part of our long-term review is we're planning to review all of our steep slope guidelines. So that would be the R10 zone, the zoning regulations, as well as the steep slope development permit guidelines. So we may just leave R10 aside and then kind of look at it all at once.
Yeah, because obviously there's a lot of single-family lots that really could only accommodate one dwelling. You'd need, it would have to be, even a lot, 1,150 square meters could only accommodate one dwelling. So they might not get the opportunity right now to put a second suite on the property, just a secondary suite. So.
Yeah, no, definitely something for us to consider while we look at this. Yeah.
Yeah, because there are a lot of steep slope lots that are just single family.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I think we can have a motion to adjourn the meeting. Somebody want to move? Ken will. He's ready to go. Kevin will second, and all in favor? Great. Thanks to everybody.